In the United States alone, nearly 200,000 individuals under the age of 18 are tried as adults in courtrooms each year. An alarming number of these young people are convicted for violent crimes, including murder. Today, we delve into 3 chilling stories of children who turned into perpetrators of heinous crimes. Each one of the children we will discuss committed their crimes as minors. Each of the children were charged as adults. Trigger warning. This video contains graphic and disturbing descriptions of child abuse and SA that may be triggering for some viewers. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Now let us get into children that kill. Imagine a child barely into his teenage years committing crimes so heinous they eventually create a new term for the type of crime. This was no ordinary child, but Jesse Pomeroy, the youngest person convicted of first-degree murder in the history of Massachusetts. Born on November 29, 1859, Jesse Harding Pomeroy was the second child of Thomas and Ruth Pomeroy. They lived in Chelsea, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston. His childhood was far from idyllic. He was close with his mother. Things were not so loving with his father. His father was a Civil War veteran and worked in Charlestown Naval Yard. He would regularly strip Jesse and his brother naked and beat with a switch until he bled. Jesse was different from the start. He suffered from an unspecified illness during his infancy that left a white, cloudy film over his right eye. He was described as having an unusually large head and was tall and thin for his age. Some reports say he may have been developmentally disabled, and his speech may have been difficult to understand. His peers found him revolting and teased him relentlessly. Jesse's sinister tendencies began to manifest early on. At the age of 5, he was caught torturing a neighbor's cat and throwing it into the river. He was just 12 years old when he started luring young boys to a shack on Powder House Hill. He lured them in with the promise of sweets. Jesse would strip them naked, beat them, violate them, and disfigure their faces and genitals with knives and pins. On December 22, 1871, Billy Payne was found hanging by his wrist from the rafters. He was half naked, and his back covered in bloody welts from a vicious whipping. He was unable to name his attacker. Over the next 9 months, 8 more boys, all under the age of 10, were abducted and beaten, each more brutal than the last. These sadistic acts left his victims scarred both physically and psychologically. They all survived, but none were able to identify Jesse. Jesse's mother knew it was him and moved the family to South Boston. The attacks continued. The police managed to catch Jesse after he had terrorized and tormented a boy that said his attacker had an eye like a white marble. He was dubbed the Boy Fiend, the Boy Torture, and the Red Devil. He was sentenced to the Westboro Boys Reform School until he turned 18. Jesse's mother petitioned for early release, and subsequently he was released at 14 years of age. No sooner had Jesse returned to society than his violent tendencies escalated. At the tender age of 14, Jesse committed his most horrifying crimes yet. He was working at his mother's shop when he abducted and murdered Katie Curran, a 10-year-old girl, and Horace Millen, a 4-year-old boy, in a chillingly brutal manner not even 10 months after his release. Jesse lured Katie into a basement and slashed her throat. After she fell to the ground, he stabbed her numerous times in the abdomen and genitals. Jesse concealed her remains and went back to work. Authorities questioned Jesse about her disappearance, but made no arrests. 1 month later, his boot prints were found near the body of 4-year-old Horace Millen. The body was nearly decapitated and dumped on the beach. When authorities came to question Jesse, he was found bloody and covered in scratches. Jesse confessed to killing the boy. Jesse's mother sold her shop shortly after. The new tenants found Katie's decomposing corpse in the basement. Jesse yet again confessed to the crime. Jesse acknowledged that he lacked control over his impulses and was overwhelmed by the desire to commit murder. Jesse's mother insisted that her boy was insane. Jesse was found to have the capacity to distinguish right from wrong and was not considered legally insane. The jury found Jesse guilty of first-degree murder, making him the youngest person in Massachusetts ever to be convicted of such a crime. They did offer leniency in sentencing due to his age, but the judge disagreed and sentenced him to death. The governor at the time, William Gaston, refused to sign his death warrant, deeming him too young for such a fate, and commuted Jesse's sentence to life in solitary confinement. At 16 years of age, Jesse began his sentence at the Massachusetts State Prison. Jesse spent the next half-century in solitary confinement. He tried to escape at least a dozen times. In one attempt, he rerouted gas pipes to his cell that caused an explosion that left him incapacitated. In 1929, he was transferred to Bridgewater State Prison Farm to live out the rest of his days. He died of a heart attack 3 years later, just shy of 73 years of age. When he died, a term had finally been invented for his crimes. He was a serial killer, America's youngest serial killer. Next, we will discuss Alyssa Bustamante. Alyssa Bustamante was a seemingly average teenager from St. Martins, Missouri. Alyssa experienced some setbacks early on in life. Her mother had issues with substance abuse leading to criminal charges. Her father was incarcerated for assault charges. Her parents lost custody of her, and grandparents ultimately gained legal custody of her and her 3 younger siblings. Despite her rocky start in life, she was a normal teen by all appearances. She was a good student and managed to receive A's and B's. She attended church regularly, enjoyed spending time with friends, listening to music and writing. Friends reported a change in Alyssa around 2007. Alyssa was intrigued by death, often exploring her thoughts on mortality in her journal entries. She engaged in self-injurious behaviors and listed cutting as one of her hobbies on her social media pages. She spent time in behavioral health units and boasted to friends about her attempts to end her life. A friend reported that Alyssa often wondered what it felt like to kill someone. 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton lived down the street from Alyssa's family. She would often come over to play with the younger siblings. Elizabeth's mother reported she was particularly eager the night of October 21, 2009, to go over and play with Alyssa's younger sister. She never made it home that night. Alyssa was the last person to have seen Elizabeth alive. In the days following Elizabeth's disappearance, a frantic search ensued. Investigators found a shallow hole shaped like a grave in Alyssa's backyard, which led authorities to questioning her. During questioning, she told the FBI that she liked to dig holes. Authorities found a similar shaped hole covered with leaves. It contained Elizabeth's body. Police seized Alyssa's journal where she had described the murder. They interrogated her further. Alyssa admitted to strangling Elizabeth, slitting her throat and burying her in a shallow grave in the woods behind their homes. She was arrested, and prosecutors charged her with first-degree murder. The St. Martins community was stricken with grief. Many expressed disbelief that such a horrific crime could have been committed by a 15-year-old. The community showed support for the Olton family. They received cards, flowers, and teddy bears, and candlelight vigils were held. Neighbors tied purple ribbons, Elizabeth's favorite color, around trees in her memory. Alyssa was arraigned and entered a plea of not guilty, despite her confession. The depth of Alyssa's detachment from her horrific actions was further exemplified during her arraignment. She appeared emotionless, even smiling at times. Although she tried to black out the entries, she wrote about the euphoria she experienced after she killed Elizabeth. She described the murder as an amazing and enjoyable experience in her journal. The young girl who once wrote about her fascination with death had now become a cold-blooded murderer. Alyssa's defense attorney argued for leniency in her sentencing due to her rough upbringing, but a judge ruled she was to be tried as an adult. Weeks before her trial was set to begin, Alyssa accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty in 2012. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. In 2014, she got a new lawyer. Ailsa said she would have never plead guilty if she knew there was a pending Supreme Court case affecting juveniles and first-degree murder sentencing. The new lawyer asked for new sentencing. A judge denied the request. Alyssa will be eligible for parole in 2024. Elizabeth's mother felt Alyssa's sentencing was too light. She said Ailsa was an evil monster. She sued Alyssa for the wrongful death of her daughter. It was settled for $5 million plus 9% interest each year goes unpaid. Her case serves as a haunting reminder of the dark capabilities that can reside within even the youngest members of society. Lastly, we will discuss Eric Smith, who was convicted of the murder of 4-year-old Derek Roby. Derek Roby, a happy and outgoing boy, lived in Savona, a small village in upstate New York. He was described as sweet and wonderful by his mother, and was known for his affectionate and loving nature. Neighbors remember him waving with a wide, toothy grin on the corner of the street. In the summer of 1993, he attended a summer camp along with Eric Smith, a teenage boy. On August 2, 1993, Derek rode his bike to camp as usual. His mother, who would normally see him off to the end of the street, stayed back that morning due to his fussy younger sibling. Derek assured his mother that he could go by himself, since the camp was at the end of their dead-end street with no roads to cross. After hugging and kissing his mother goodbye, he set off on his way. However, he never made it to camp that morning. Instead of reaching the camp, Derek crossed paths with Eric. Eric lured Derek into a wooded area where he committed a horrific and senseless act of violence. He strangled Derek, smashed his head with a rock, and violated him with a stick. Adding to the brutality, Eric poured Kool-Aid from Derek's lunchbox into his wounds. Derek's mother, Doreen, arrived at the camp at 11 a.m. to pick him up, only to find out that he had never arrived. Worried, she reported him missing, leading to a massive search. 4 hours later, Derek's lifeless body was found in the woods, just a few yards from the park, and a few hundred yards from his home. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma with asphyxia. The police were shocked by the gruesome scene and the apparent lack of motive. Initially, the police suspected that the killer was an adult from out of town, but their focus soon shifted to Eric. 2 days after Derek's funeral, a family friend of the Smiths, Mary Haskell, expressed growing concern over Eric's behavior to Derek's mother. When confronted, Eric asked what would happen if the killer was a child. Concerned, Eric's mother and Mary took him to the police station. At first, Eric denied any involvement but seemed to enjoy discussing murder. Eventually, he confessed, saying, "I am sorry, Mom, I'm sorry, I killed that little boy." The brutal murder garnered international attention and was covered by news sources worldwide. People across the globe were saddened and angered by the senseless acts of violence committed against a helpless young boy. Dateline, Oprah, and 48 Hours all did episodes covering the case. There was an outpouring of support for the Roby family. They received thousands of sympathy cards and letters of support from strangers, politicians, and celebrities. Eric was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. He was tried as an adult. The trial began on January 31st, 1994. It would last 2 weeks and was a complete media frenzy. The media dubbed him the freckle-face killer. The prosecution argued that Eric acted with depraved indifference and intended to kill Derek. They presented evidence of the brutality of the murder, such as the autopsy photos, the rocks used as weapons, and Kool-Aid found near the body. They argued Eric was unhappy with his life, so took another. They played his videotaped confession in court. The defense claimed that Eric was mentally ill and suffered from intermittent explosive disorder, a condition that causes sudden and uncontrollable outbursts of rage. They also said that Eric was a victim of bullying and abuse, and that he had a low IQ and poor impulse control. They brought in several experts to testify about Eric's psychological problems and his troubled childhood. They also tried to cast doubt on the validity of Eric's confession, saying that he was coerced and manipulated by the police. After just 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found Eric guilty of second-degree murder on February 15, 1994. At the age of 14, Eric Smith was sentenced to 9 years to life, the maximum sentence allowed to juveniles. Eric apologized to the Roby family on television. They did not accept. He remained in a juvenile detention center until his 21st birthday. Eric was then transferred to an adult state prison. Eric spent 28 years behind bars. Eric became eligible for parole in 2002. Eric was denied parole 10 times between 2002 and 2021. He was granted parole in October of 2021 and released in February of 2022. Eric told the parole board he wants to get married, have a family, and pursue the American dream. He insists he is a changed man and is deserving of freedom. The original prosecutor of the case believes that the parole board is taking a huge gamble. The parents of Derek Robbie have been vocally against his release and say they will never forgive him. The case of Eric Smith and the others we have discussed today raise many questions about the nature of evil, the psychology of killers, and the justice system. Are children born evil or made evil by their environment? Should we take more preventive measures instead of waiting for problems to arise with our troubled youth? If such tragedies cannot be prevented, are these children able to be rehabilitated? Perhaps these questions will never be answered. Maybe there will always be children that kill.